On what was supposed to be a quiet patrol, Ethan never expected his truck to be stopped by the most feared hunter on the plains. The big male lion stood in the middle of the dusty road, not with a kill in his jaws, but with a human tranquilizer dart clenched between his teeth. Then he turned and walked toward the deep bush, asking Ethan to follow him into forbidden ground, where his only cub lay fading under the very weapon Ethan had once been trained to use. The sun was only just lifting itself over the edge of the plains when Tao rose from his place on the rock. The air was cool and thin, carrying the faint smell of dust, dry grass, and the lingering night. He stretched slowly, every muscle rolling under his tawny coat, then turned his head toward the dark mouth of the den carved into the hillside behind him. From the shadow came a small sound, a soft, impatient mewl. Nuru. The cub stumbled out first, big paws too clumsy for the stones, followed by Lila, her coat brushed with the gold of morning. She nudged the cub back from the edge with an easy, practiced motion, then settled beside him so he could climb over her neck and tug at her ear. Tao watched them for a long moment, his chest rising with a slow, steady breath that felt like peace. This was his world, the line of low hills marking the edge of his territory, the scattered acacia trees, thin and stubborn, clinging to patches of earth that still remembered the last rain. The invisible trails worn by hooves and paws over seasons. Every scent in the wind told him who belonged and who did not. It was a language he had learned from hunger, from fights, from long nights of listening. Far beyond that familiar circle, past the tall, whispering grass, something else moved. A low rumble, like distant thunder, brushed against his ears. Tao lifted his head. The sound faded, then returned, joined by a faint, sharp smell he did not like. Metal, smoke, the bitter trace of something that did not belong to the land. It was not new. He had heard it before, seen pale shapes on wheels cutting across the horizon. They came and went like storms that never gave rain. Nuru tumbled after a grasshopper, pouncing badly, then looking up as if expecting praise. Lila answered with a gentle lick across his forehead, her eyes half closed, content. Tao stepped down from his rock and walked toward them, brushing his flank against Lila's as he passed. She leaned into him for a moment, their bodies touching in a quiet greeting that needed no sound. He listened once more to the far-off growl of engines, then turned away from it. The sky was brightening, and there were patrols to make, boundaries to walk, trails to scent mark. The day smelled of routine, of duties he knew by heart. Behind him, in the safety of the den's shadow, his son's small laughter mews drifted into the morning air. Tao did not know it yet, but this was the last time he would leave them with the easy certainty that everything would still be the same when he came back. The morning grew warmer as Tao moved away from the den, his paws silent on the dry earth. He followed an old game trail along the edge of his territory, nose low to the ground. Here, the air held the familiar tracks of antelope and zebra, the musky traces of other lions that knew to stay on their side of the invisible lines he guarded. The world felt ordered, known. Then, halfway up a gentle rise, the wind changed. A new scent slid over his tongue, thin and sharp, cutting through the honest smells of dust and animal. Metal, oil, a sour, anxious sweat that did not belong to prey or predator. Tao stopped, head lifted, ears tilting forward. The low growl of engines hummed somewhere beyond the hill, then faded, then hummed again, like a restless insect that would not settle. He moved closer, step by careful step, until he reached a point where the grass thinned and tire tracks bit into the ground. The smell of men was stronger here, tangled with the faint echo of burnt fuel. Tao stared at the marks, tail twitching, then turned his head toward the horizon where the sound had gone. Nothing moved. The sky was a clean, empty blue. Back near the den, Lila nudged Nuru out into the light, choosing a patch of young grass that grew in a shallow dip not far from the rocks. The cub bounded ahead, batting at a butterfly, then stopping to wrestle with a clump of tough stems as if it were a rival. Lila watched him with the cautious patience of a mother who has already lost sleep to his curiosity. Neither of them saw the shape crouched farther downwind, hidden by brush and the dull color of a parked vehicle. The first sign was not sight, but sound, a sharp, unnatural crack that split the air. Tao's head snapped up. The echo of the shot rolled over the hills, wrong and hollow. For a heartbeat, he could not place it. Then instinct shouted louder than thought. He spun and ran, muscles driving him back the way he had come, back toward the den. When he reached the clearing, the grass told the story before his eyes did. The bitter sting of the drug was everywhere. Lila lay on her side, her body already too still, eyes open to a sky she no longer saw. Nuru lay nearby, legs splayed awkwardly, a slender dart jutting from his small shoulder. His chest moved, but each breath seemed to fight its way out. Tao stood frozen, the world narrowing to the smell of iron, chemical, and loss. He had faced rival males, hyenas, even hunger. None of it had ever felt like this. A threat without a face, a wound that no teeth could reach. For a long moment, Tao did not move. The wind pressed the grass flat around him, tugging at Lila's fur, carrying away the warm scent that had always meant safety and home. Nuru's small chest still rose and fell, but each breath seemed to sink deeper, as if something heavy were pushing him down into the earth. Tao lowered his head and touched Lila's flank with his nose. There was no answer there. No muscle twitch, no quiet rumble in her chest. He moved to Nuru, sniffing around the strange object buried in his shoulder. The smell that came off the dart was harsh and bitter, nothing like blood or soil or any injury he knew how to clean. It burned his nose, made him pull back and sneeze. He walked a tight circle around them, once, twice, 3 times, claws tearing at the dry ground. Every part of him wanted to stay, to lie down beside his cub and guard him against whatever came next. That was what he understood. Keep close, show teeth if anything approached, fight until the danger passed. But this danger was different. It had come from far away, on a loud crack of sound and a feathered sting. It had taken Lila in an instant and left Nuru fading without a wound he could see. Tao lifted his head and looked toward the horizon. In his memory, there were other smells and sounds tied to this bitter scent. The white trucks that sometimes came into the reserve, the men in uniforms who moved slowly and spoke quietly as they worked around injured animals. He remembered once watching from a distance as they loaded a wounded antelope into a vehicle. Then, weeks later, seeing that same animal running again, a faint line on its side the only sign of what had happened. The thought was clumsy, not like the simple, sharp thoughts of hunger or fear. But it was there. The ones who carried this smell might also know how to take it away. Tao bent down and gripped the dart gently in his teeth, careful not to pierce his own mouth with its point. He tasted the metal, the drug, the fingerprint of the humans who had fired it. Then, with one last look at Nuru, he turned away from the den. Each step away from the shadowed safety of the rocks felt wrong, like walking off the edge of a known path into a place where the ground might not be there. Yet he kept going, following the faint trail of fuel and dust that led toward the roads and the buildings at the edge of his world, carrying the weapon of his enemy as a message they were never meant to receive. Ethan Cole had been on the reserve for less than a month, but the rhythm of his patrol route was already starting to feel familiar. The old truck rattled along the dirt road, its windows half rolled down to let in the morning air. He could smell dust, dry grass, and every so often the faint sweetness of wildflowers clinging to the low places where a little moisture still lingered. He checked his rearview mirror, then the small GPS unit mounted to the dash, more out of habit than worry. It was a quiet assignment, they had told him. Learn the roads, watch for broken fences, report anything suspicious. Most days the animal stayed at a distance, shadows moving gracefully along the edges of his vision. He saw more tracks than actual bodies. He was thinking of home, of his father's voice on the phone, half proud and half anxious about his son working halfway around the world. When the shape dropped into the road ahead of him, Ethan hit the brakes without thinking. The truck shuddered and skidded in the loose dust before coming to a stop 20 yards away from the lion. It was a full-grown male, larger than any he had seen outside of a documentary. Tawny coat, dark mane, ruffled by the breeze, shoulders thick with muscle. It stood squarely in the center of the track, tail low but not tucked, head held high. Its eyes were fixed on the truck. Ethan's heart hammered. Every lecture from training came back to him in a rush. Stay in the vehicle, do not approach, do not startle. He reached for the radio, but his hand hovered over it, unwilling to make a sudden move. The lion did not charge. It did not roar. Instead, it lowered its head, and something glinted between its teeth. With a slow, deliberate step, it came closer, stopping just beyond the reach of the front bumper. Then it dropped the object onto the packed earth. Ethan squinted through the windshield. A feathered tail, a slim shaft. The color drained from his face. A dart. The lion lifted one broad paw and nudged the dart forward, letting it roll a few inches closer to the truck. Its eyes never left his. The message, whatever it was, seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy and impossible. Ethan swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. This wasn't in any manual he'd ever read. For a long time, neither of them moved. Dust drifted lazily between truck and lion, turning in the sunlight like tiny, aimless birds. Ethan's fingers finally closed around the radio, then loosened again. Calling for backup meant waiting. Waiting meant doing nothing. And whatever had been on the other end of that dart probably didn't have time to waste. The lion, Tao, gave a low, rasping exhale, almost a sigh, then turned away from the truck. He took a few slow steps down the road, paused, and looked back over his shoulder. The message was as clear as if someone had spoken it in Ethan's ear. Come. Ethan heard his instructor's voice in his memory, steady and firm. Never follow a big cat on foot. Your job is to observe, not to play hero. Another voice rose over it, softer but sharper somehow. The voice that had narrated all those nature documentaries he'd loved as a kid, talking about dwindling numbers, animals poisoned or shot, rescues that came too late. He shut off the engine. The sudden quiet pressed in on him, filled with insect buzz and the far-off call of some unseen bird. Ethan opened the door slowly, stepping down onto the road with his medical bag and a small case of tranquilizer antidotes and emergency supplies. His boots felt heavier than they should have. He kept the truck between himself and Tao until he was fully out, then edged forward, heartbeat loud in his ears. Tao watched him, muscles coiled, but still. When Ethan was clear of the vehicle, the lion turned again and began to walk, not along the road, but off it into the tall grass. He did not look back this time. He seemed to assume Ethan would follow. The grass closed around Ethan's legs, whispering against his pants. He kept a careful few yards of distance between himself and Tao, never letting the lion out of his sight, but giving him space. Above them, a pair of vultures circled, their dark wings cutting slow, lazy arcs in the hot sky. It was not a comforting sign. The farther they went, the more the world changed. The distant rumble of roads faded. The smell of fuel thinned and disappeared, replaced by the raw scents of earth, old kills, and hidden water. Tao moved with purpose, pausing now and then to lift his head, tasting the wind, making sure no other danger lay ahead. Ethan stumbled once on a hidden stone and caught himself, mindful not to make any sudden rush or grab that might startle the lion. Sweat slid down his back despite the shade of scattered acacias. Every few minutes, he glanced up at the circling birds, then at the lion's shoulders, reading urgency in the tightness of the muscles there. They crested a low rise, and Tao stopped. Below them, the land dipped into a shallow, rocky fold. At first, Ethan saw only stone and shadow. Then his eyes adjusted, and he made out the dark opening of a den pressed into the hillside. He understood in that instant why a king of this place would step into a road and block a truck. Whatever waited in that hollow was the reason. Tao went first, sliding down the slope with the ease of long habit. Ethan followed more carefully, boots scraping on loose stones, one hand braced against the hillside. As they drew closer, the air grew cooler, the smell of sun-baked rock giving way to something sharper and more intimate. Lion, milk, old sleep, and the bitter sting of the drug. The den was little more than a dark cut in the earth, just tall enough for Tao to duck inside without lowering his head all the way. For a heartbeat, Ethan hesitated at the edge. Instinct told him this was a line no human was meant to cross. Then Nuru made a small, broken sound from the shadows, and that decided it. Tao slipped into the darkness, his bulk blocking most of the light. Ethan crouched and entered sideways, keeping his shoulders turned, his body language small. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust. When they did, he saw the cub. Nuru lay on his side on the packed earth, legs sprawled, chest rising in shallow, uneven pulls. The dart still jutted from his shoulder, the skin around it puffed and tense. His tongue was slightly out, dry at the edges. He looked far too small for the amount of drug Ethan knew a dart like that could hold. Very slowly, Ethan set his bag down and opened it, making sure every movement was deliberate and calm. Tao stood just behind the cub, a living wall of muscle and breath. His head was low, eyes fixed on Ethan's hands. A low rumble vibrated in his chest whenever the young man moved too quickly. "It's all right," Ethan murmured, more for himself than for the lion. "I'm here to help him, that's all." He examined the dart first. The label on the side made his stomach twist. The dosage was meant for an adult lioness, maybe larger. In a cub this size, it was flirting with disaster. With a steady hand, he gripped the shaft and eased it free, then cleaned the small puncture with antiseptic from his kit. Nuru twitched faintly, but did not wake. Ethan drew up a measured amount of reversal agent, doing the math in his head twice before letting the needle touch the cub's skin. Tao's growl deepened at the sight of the syringe. Ethan paused, met the lion's eyes, and held them for a long, tense second. "Choose, big guy," he whispered under his breath. "Either you trust me, or we both lose him." Tao's tail flicked once. The growl faded to a rough, uneasy breath. Ethan took that as permission and finished the injection, then gently adjusted Nuru's head so his airway stayed clear, listening to each strained inhale. For a few minutes, the only sounds were the cub's breathing and the slow rasp of Tao's own. Then, from somewhere beyond the hill, a different sound drifted in. The cough of an engine turning over, followed by laughter, harsh and careless. Tao's head snapped up. Ethan froze, listening. The vehicle was closer than he liked, the voices riding on the same chemical scent that clung to the dart. They were coming back. Ethan's hand went to his radio and the sidearm at his belt almost at the same time. Tao moved toward the mouth of the den, body low, shoulders rising like a storm gathering at the horizon. Inside the narrow space between a fading cub and a wild father ready to face guns with teeth, Ethan understood just how thin the line was between rescue and tragedy. Tao reached the mouth of the den before Ethan, his body filling the opening like a door that had learned to growl. Outside, the sounds were clearer now. An engine idling nearby, doors creaking, men's voices trading low jokes in a language Ethan didn't fully understand but recognized in tone. Careless, confident, certain that nothing here could challenge them. Ethan slid out beside Tao, keeping low, the den's shadow wrapping around his shoulders. From where they crouched, he could see the edge of a battered truck just beyond the rise, its paint dulled by dust. Two men stood near the open tailgate, sorting through a small crate. A third climbed down from the cab, a rifle slung loosely over his shoulder. Tao's lips peeled back, teeth catching the light. His muscles tightened, every line of his body shouting the same thing. This was the source of the bitter smell, the crack of sound, the stillness that had taken Lila. Here, at last, was something he could sink his teeth into. Ethan's hand hovered near his sidearm, then moved instead to his radio. His voice came out low but steady. He gave his coordinates, told them there were armed intruders, mentioned the truck, the men, the direction they were facing. In the back. Of his mind, he knew help was still miles away, but the call was a line thrown out into the world, a promise that someone else would know what had happened here. The man with the rifle turned, eyes narrowing as he spotted movement on the hillside. For a heartbeat, he seemed confused, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. A lion and a man standing side by side in the same patch of shade. Then training or fear snapped into place. He yanked the rifle up. Tao did not wait. He exploded from the shadows with a roar that shook loose dust from the rocks, a sound so deep it seemed to come from the bones of the earth itself.
Look over there.
The sudden charge broke whatever brittle courage held the men together. One stumbled backward, dropping the crate. Metallic clinks rang out as darts and cartridges spilled into the dirt. Another scrambled for the truck, shouting. The man with the rifle fired, but the shot went wild as Tao slammed into him with the full force of his weight, sending both man and weapon tumbling. The rifle flew from his hands, skidding into the grass. The second man bolted for the driver's seat, boots slipping, while the third scrambled up onto the back of the truck, eyes wide, scanning for the lost gun. Ethan drew his own pistol, lifted it high, and sent a single round into the air. The crack split the scene like lightning. For a brief second, all movement froze. Then, from far off, an answering sound rose. The faint wail of a distant siren, carried thin but distinct on the wind. That did it. The men broke. One yanked the truck door shut and gunned the engine. Another leaped into the bed, pounding on the roof. The vehicle lurched, sprayed stones, and spun away in a cloud of dust, leaving behind only scattered trash and the fading echo of its retreat. Tao stood in the middle of the churned-up ground, sides heaving, mane bristling. His eyes stayed fixed on the disappearing truck until it was a speck on the horizon. Only then did he turn back toward the den. Ethan lowered his weapon slowly. The radio at his shoulder crackled with distant voices answering his call, promising they were on their way. For a moment, he simply met Tao's gaze across the dust and broken grass. No treaty was spoken, no understanding signed. But in that quiet after the noise, it was clear enough. For this one small corner of the world, for this one fragile life in the den behind them, they had fought on the same side. Weeks later, the land looked the same, but Ethan felt different driving through it. The grass still bowed under the wind. The same dust rose in the truck's wake, and the same thin clouds drifted across the wide African sky. Yet every hill and hollow now carried a memory. He knew where the truck of the poachers had skidded in panic, where the scattered darts had gleamed in the dirt, where Tao's roar had shaken the morning apart. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Kamau, a veteran ranger with a lined face and calm eyes that had seen more than Ethan cared to imagine. He had been the first to reach Ethan's last call for help, leading the team that followed the fleeing truck and, days later, helped shut down a small but nasty poaching ring. Even now, the older man shook his head when he spoke of it. "They get smarter," Kamau said quietly, scanning the horizon. "But so do we." The truck climbed a gentle rise, engine humming. As they rolled over the crest, Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a prickle along the back of his neck. He slowed without thinking, tires crunching softly on the track. Down below, on a sun-warmed ledge of rock, lay a lion and a cub.
But so do we.
Tao was stretched out in a patch of light, his mane stirred by a lazy breeze. Beside him, smaller but sturdier than before, Nuru sat upright, watching the truck with clear, bright eyes. His shoulder bore a faint scar where the dart had gone in, but his breathing was easy, his posture steady. He leaned lightly against his father's side, as if taking strength from the solid warmth there. Kamau leaned forward, impressed. "You don't often see them this close to the road," he murmured. "Your lion, maybe?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He met Tao's gaze across the distance. There was no recognition in the human sense, no wave of the tail, no softening of the eyes. But there was no fear either, just awareness. The look of a creature that had weighed a danger once and found, for a brief moment, something else instead. Ethan lifted his binoculars, then lowered them without raising them to his eyes.
Maybe?
"Maybe," he said. "Either way, this is their hill." Later, back at the station, his report was neat and complete. Coordinates, description of the lions, note on their apparent recovery. He wrote about fencing repairs, patrol routes, and follow-up on the poaching case. He did not mention the den or the way a lion had led him there with a dart in its teeth. Some things, he decided, belonged to the land itself. As the sun slid low and the sky turned the color of old embers, Ethan stepped outside and listened to the distant sounds of the reserve settling in for the night. Somewhere out there, a cub chased shadows at the edge of a den, under the watchful eyes of a father who had once walked into a road and asked a stranger for help. No words had passed between them, no promises had been spoken, but both of them in their own way had agreed to the same simple thing, to guard what they could for as long as they were able. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.